What has been said the entire day might be a fact, that the church no longer has influence on national life. Canon, because yours is a membership organization, what sort of challenges have you faced with regulation? The Attorney General is saying what he is saying, and I will quote what he said to the media in his moratorium that was actually referred to by the Honorable Justice Mongo, that he said this was necessitated by several reports indicating the officials of several religious institutions and societies orchestrating certain unconscionable activities that left their congregants at a disadvantage. So the church is saying, we don't want outside regulation, but what sort of regulation is happening internally? Or what sort of challenges are you facing with regulation amongst the membership of the NCCK?
Thank you. First, the church really hasn't said it is allergic to regulation. And the comment that was quoted from me said most churches have actually internal structures and mechanisms for their own governance and internal regulation within denominations, and they don't create a problem for anyone. But there are a few independents, single congregation churches run by perceived highly charismatic people who have very strong grips on their followers. And one of the things we said, you don't deal with deviation by tying down everyone. You should focus the problem accurately and deal with it. And what I would say is that this is work in progress. There is discussion within the church and consultation with government, and a mechanism should be found eventually that speaks to the need that is there. And it's not a matter to be populist about, it's a matter to look at very keenly and authentically. If you ask the challenges that we have within NCCK, we really wouldn't say that we have a problem. The bulk of our churches have pretty good structures that they live by. Some of the independents who may be a bit weak in structure, NCCK has a whole structure called capacity building for membership that quietly, without fanfare, works with our member churches in the areas of difficulty. Is it a constitution they need to craft? Is it a constitution they need to amend and revise to meet their needs? Is it how they should manage their leadership transitions? And this is being done programmatically as a way of life, and many churches have benefited. You could say the same about the Evangelical Alliance. These rogue preachers are not under any authority, and we must find a way to rein them in eventually without stifling ministry.
Well, but just takes just one rogue preacher who may or may not be a member of the Evangelical Alliance, or may not be a member of NCCK, and it brings it all down. So what do we do about those others who might not be members, of that? Because everybody looks to you, leadership, and says, do something.
Now, obviously, as General Secretary of NCCK, people who are not a part of our structure are not under my oversight in any way. I think the guidance we try to give is, if a religious leader does what is considered to be criminal, and some things border on crime, the law of the land is applicable. And nobody is above the law, particularly if they're involved in the conduct of public affairs. And to the extent that the law is violated, people should be held to account. The church has never been without one or two rogue fellows right from the start. You remember Judas Iscariot was amongst the 12, first generation. But the church continues to journey and carry out its work, notwithstanding the occasional difficulties that may arise. But Yvonne, this is something that we must grapple with and deal with and get a solution for. Thank you.
Bishop Oginda, is there no way to bring these rogue members in say something about it, make a statement? I know Canon is saying there's a lot of work that's done quietly, but perhaps that is part of the problem, that the public just does not know of this work that is being done to strengthen governance within the churches. So where do we go from here, Bishop?
The Constitution provides for freedom of worship. And so anybody, and freedom of association. So anybody can organize themselves in the way they want to without reference to any other person. So really, just from a practical point of view, if today I go out and start a church, and those who believe in my leadership come and join me, and we begin to organize ourselves in a particular way, he has no right to come and tell me I can't organize myself that way. So it becomes very difficult for any particular umbrella body to come and purport to bring control over any person who is running their independent church. And that's why, as Canon has said, we have said that where there are violations of the law, there is the law of the land. And actually the Bible rightly says in the book of Romans that the governor or government is there to ensure that everybody follows the law. In fact, the Bible says the governor does not hold the sword in vain. In other words, any person who is involved in criminality has ceased to be under the freedoms that are provided for. But any umbrella body cannot go out there and draw members and say, you cannot do this and you cannot do that. Sometime back in the mid-90s, we tried to put together an equivalent of what is in the US, which is called an accountability kind of body, which would be a free will. You know, you come and join in, and when you join in, then there are certain parameters that you have to operate by. And how it works in the US is that it gives you certain privileges. For example, in raising funds, getting tax exempt, and things like that. And therefore, it helps people to want to join. If the government were to set up those kinds of privileges, and they say that only these kinds of people who are abide by these kind of rules and practices can enjoy some of the privileges that have been there in the church that have since been withdrawn, I think it would encourage many church leaders to try and get into a place where they can be oversighted by other people. That I see may be the only way.
All right, and I'll come back to that in a moment, because across the board we're saying some of those who are rogue are not our members. And therefore what they do out there, there's not much control. Let's just put a pause there, because I'll come back to that. Archbishop Sapit, you had talked about boundaries. There seemed to be very little boundary between religious leaders, church leaders, and politicians, and persons of very questionable character, that at several of the churches, politicians stand on the pulpit and make political statements that they're in fact the major benefactors of churches, giving large sums of donations. Do you agree that there has been that boundary between the church and the persons you are supposed to hold accountable may have been blurred at some point, and that leads to the lack of faith, with ordinary Kenyans?
Indeed, as you say, those boundaries are becoming thinner and thinner. And you know, the church is one place that is free for everybody to enter. And therefore, you cannot wake up one day and say, so and so cannot come to this church.
Well, Archbishop, they can definitely come to church.
Yes.
But do they have to be on the pulpit, on your very holy pulpit, and make political statements?
Not on the pulpit.
I mean, they can come and pray.
Not on the pulpit. I'm saying the church is open for everybody to come in. And the church has to guard her pulpit, because people who are supposed to preach are people who are ordained, people who have been church and given that mandate by the church. not anybody just walk into the pulpit and preach. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not denying the fact that you go to every church, and particularly if we can just be all blunt to ourselves, in the political environment, for example, for this country, the churches becomes the most popular places for politicians to come in. And they will want to come and say something. And I even invited, before even they say we want to say something, by us, the leaders of the churches, to come and greet the people. And in that form of greeting, statements are made which ought not to have been made in church. And therefore, I think this is an area that the church must own up and say, we have done what is not supposed to be done. In cases that somebody has been given an opportunity to use the church podium to do things that are not of church. Sometimes ago, politicians will come, but they used not to speak even inside the church. Yeah. They will go out of the door
exactly.
and make greet people there and make whatever statement they want to make there. So that's why I was saying, as we went by, I don't know where these boundaries has collapsed.
All right.
And so I began by owning up that so many boundaries have collapsed.
Have collapsed. Archbishop, allow me to put you on the spot. Is there a moratorium within the Anglican Church now to not allow politicians on the podium?
Actually,
or is this something that you can commit here?
During the last...
that we can all hold you accountable.
During the last campaign period, I think I was on record saying we should stop politicians from making political on the podium of the church or even inside the churches. And I followed a statement also said by a Catholic bishop in Embu. I don't know whether you remember that week. And I think it is a commitment that we need to ask ourselves. Should we be opening the church to be the place where accusations are threaded or where political statements are made? Or should we allow worshippers to come to the churches and worship? After worshiping, then we go out and they will be able to say to whatever they want to say, what they want to say outside.
All right. I think we will all hold you to account to that one. Remember, I do a show on Sundays, and that is always the day when politicians have been going to church. So I will be sure, if one Sunday I read a bulletin and say, politician XYZ was at particular Anglican church, this one, I will be sure, and I know how to reach you. I will be sure to make sure that we remind you of this commitment here today.
What I'm saying is that we have a system as the Anglican Church, but we also have dioceses that are autonomous and bishops.
Here we go.
I'm speaking reality that you can wake up tomorrow and you have somebody in Mombasa or wherever with a politician in charge. But what I'm saying is... That's an
interesting question. Then. Are there consequences? I mean, I know the structure of how it works, but are there consequences? And maybe Canon Karanja can talk about this. What are the consequences for members that go against your articles, that go against the rules, that go against what has been set up? I mean, do we see certain persons being expelled from the membership of the NCCK? What happens then?
I think Schluter gave us a statement that some people may have missed when he began his remarks. The church rises or falls on the local church. It really is the engine of the health and the life of the church, presided over by a priest or a minister in a very local community setting. Now, the politicians are members of the churches. They will tell you about when they were baptized, when they were confirmed, and their mother was an elder. Correctly. I think rather than being overly judgmental, I think the task we have is to appreciate that the ordinary clergyman in the village may not understand and have the skills of managing the situations when the politicians come. Because I've been to local church settings, the politicians come, the priest stands and says, I'll give you a chance to greet the congregation. I'll stand here and not sit down when you're doing that. There are things that are off limits.
Canon, why does he have to greet the congregation? I have never been asked to greet the congregation at Valley Road.
Now, now,
And I like to think I'm as senior as they come, but my point is this. I mean, the village pastor, like you say, may not know these things, but isn't that the role of the leadership of the church, of the archbishop, of Canon Karanja, to sit down with that village pastor who has 5 people in his congregation, 100 people, 1,000,000 people, and to say, this is a code we have agreed to live by? Because so far what I'm hearing from here tonight is it's difficult, it's not us, it's the government, it's the ones who are not members. I'm not hearing a lot of ownership of saying this is what we can do as leaders here.
I'm not passing blame, Yvonne. I'm saying this priest may need some empowerment. The bishop, the person that supervises them, has a responsibility to understand the dynamics and be able to guide and hold to account his local pastors as they carry out their work. The politicians are ours. If they keep within the bounds, there is no reason to treat them as though they are excommunicated. Actually, they do need spiritual support that ought to be taken into account by the leaders of the church. So I would say we find how to solve problems where they are identified without throwing out people, but without allowing the church to be abused by anyone. This is an area where the church, I would say, has not succeeded very much. I think part of the challenge is some of the priests actually support some of the politicians. Some of them are their relatives. Some of them may be in their political parties. Occasionally, a priest may actually desire to give advantage to one politician rather than the other. So this whole subject of empowerment, I think, is critical. Part of it is spiritual discipline. Part of it is pure administration. It's a thing that we shall be on for a long time.
And so how do you plan to empower them?
The primary responsibility of the empowerment of the clergy is primarily by the head of the church and those that they share oversight with. At NCCK and in the fraternal groups, we may add some impetus on that. But if you consider the number of clergy that are in this country and the congregations that meet, really, their structures have a responsibility to create the kind of protocols required that can be shared. And NCCK and EAK can support the denominations in that journey,
And
but
how?
someone must take the responsibility.
How? Because I'm looking for tangible solutions tonight.
Good question. How can it be done? I said earlier that one of the strategies we have at NCCK is capacity building for membership, where we target member churches and work with them in their organizational development and in their issues. And we have numerous fora where we interact with them and pass good practices messages that may not be on the media. They don't want to have everything in the media.
Why not?
So we know how to do it.
I need it to earn a living. Might be good to have some of these. All right, thank you, Canon. Bishop, financial probity and accountability is one of the big ones that is there in terms of how much money the church receives, the tithe, where it goes, the paying for prayer phenomenon, the planting a seed, or as many people know, it's pandambegu. And many people, I think that perhaps would be the start of the disconnect, because the person that gives the most is the one who becomes the deacon or in the church elders. We know this, right? I mean, this happens. So let's talk about financial probity and accountability within the church for all the monies that are received, where they go, and how this then affects the credibility of the church to even speak to government and say, why are we taking another Eurobond in this country when the church itself doesn't seem to be quite open when it comes to its books?
Thank you, Yvonne. Maybe before I answer that, I just wanted to make a comment on the previous question. Differing slightly from what you seemed to be pushing, because politicians are actually leaders in society. And when a leader in society, according to the word of God, we give respect to whom respect is due and honor to whom honor is due. That's what the Bible guides, how the Bible guides us to treat leaders that are in society. And for example, in our own context, the guidelines that we have given to our pastors is that there are 2 or 3 ways in which a politician could come into a service. There are those politicians who attend regularly, are members of the church. We don't give them when they come in, they may have been away for 3 months, they come back, we don't give them any special recognition because they are members of the congregation. There may be a political leader who just walks in on that particular day. They are not regular attendants. They did not give us notice that they are coming. We did not invite them for any special occasion. You acknowledge them because they are leaders in society, and the congregation is aware that so-and-so is around. So from the pulpit, you could say, congregation, we are privileged today to have so-and-so with us in the congregation. Mheshimiwa so-and-so, we thank you for joining us for worship today. And it ends there. There are people you cannot ignore. For example, the president comes, or the deputy president comes, or a leader of opposition joins you for worship. Those are significant leaders in society that will cause a stir among the congregation. In fact, if you ignore them, they will not listen. The congregation will not listen to your sermon because they will be wondering, how can pastor continue as if nothing has happened and Honorable Raila is right here with us, or deputy president is here or the president is with here. So the congregation themselves expect that you'll give that person due respect and due honor. And beyond that, allow them to say something because they are not here with us every day. Some of these people have never seen this person at close quarters. So if you ignore that, you yourself are failing in your duty. So how you manage that situation is very important so that you give honor to whom honor is due without causing commotion, but with also not inviting them. So normally what I would do, I would say, today we are privileged to have His Excellency, the Deputy President or the Leader of Opposition visiting with us. We will give him a chance to just greet the people, but not to make any political statements. And that we normally say. So when this person
do they listen to you?
Most cases they do.
Good.
Most cases they
So
do.
at least you have some influence
Yes.
in that respect. That's
But
good.
there are people who we invite. Like just last Sunday, we had a function. Is it last Sunday or the other Sunday? We had a function in our Thika town branch, which is a new congregation. And the pastor there took liberty to invite the governor, deputy governor, and so on. They were actually invited by the church. So you can't invite them and then not give them a chance. So those are our visitors, those are our guests. So we treat them in that way as our guests. We give them opportunity to say something. Again, we remind them this is not an opportunity for campaign or politicking. And so far, I would say, in our own context, we have not found a situation where those opportunities are abused. But I just thought I could give that kind of example of how we handle that. But coming to money, money is a big deal. Canon Karanja mentioned Judas, who was in the 12. I think the accountability in church and how the money is used is part of our key responsibilities as a Christian community. And every church really owes it to account. Jesus himself says that we are going to give an account. He gives example of a man who gave talents to his workers. And when he came back, he asked them to account. What did you do with the talents that I gave you? And they gave an account. So as church leaders, we need to set systems in place where on a regular basis, we give an account to our members. This is how much money we received. This is how we utilized it. And it is also, according to the Societies Act, it's required actually for you to give an account to your members and to have your books audited. So I think it is just good practice that we have our books audited, we give an account to our members, we let them know how much money we collected in the year, how much, where we spent it, what we spent it on, and allow them to question our activities. Why did you spend so much money on this? Why did you ignore this area? And for example, in our own AGMs, members have the liberty to ask any question, not just on money, but on how we govern ourselves. I think it is part of good governance practice.
Public participation is a big one, and we're right now in the formulation of the budget, the national budget of this country. To what extent, Archbishop Sapit, is public participation allowed within the Anglican Church, not just after, which is how the money was spent, but rather before, in how they want the money to be spent?
In the Anglican Church, we have a quite elaborate system. Most dioceses have their financial management system. We have at the provincial level, where we engage people in budget-making processes. And how budgets are arrived at the diocesan level is stemming from the grassroots, which is the parishes, discussing about what they want to spend on their money as they collect from the local churches, and that stems upward to the national level. And therefore, they do participate using the parish councils or the local church councils, and they all have an AGM where they come and discuss next year's budget as well as receive this year's financial accountability systems. At the national level, we demand that every diocese submit their audited accounts. And therefore, we have audited accounts of various dioceses. And therefore, I think for the Anglican Church of Kenya, just say a few errand or somebody who is not careful about their work, but systems are there, and we ensure that participation is right from the local church coming upward.
And that may be a little different within the NCCK, right? Because, you know, the Anglican Church is one body and they have their dioceses. But what happens within the NCCK in terms of that? What sort of financial probity standards do you require of the membership of NCCK?
The Anglican Church is a member of NCCK and one of the larger ones. Every member church is a body corporate under the law with their own internal instruments and structures. And we encourage them to follow the good practices in their own structures because that is their right and their responsibility. We don't ask that they submit accounts to us because we do not have that kind of accountability responsibility. But if we find that they are breaking the boundaries, as it were, we have a discipline mechanism that enables us to hold them to account. At NCCK, as a body corporate, we have our own structures, a finance and admin committee that is responsible for the budget and its implementation and auditing of accounts. And our executive committee is the governing organ that passes all decisions related to finances. I think it's an effort that is being made within churches. Our experience is that the churches that are transparent, that let their members know what they are doing with the money, tend to find increases in their revenues very substantially because of the confidence that they build. The ones that are opaque and find it difficult to declare all the things that go on in relation to finances, they tend to be pretty limited in the kind of revenues that they make. And so you want to tell churches, it is in their interest to be absolutely transparent because that is what inspires the confidence that is necessary for the members to give generously and faithfully for the work.
So what would happen if Archbishop Sapit fails to be accountable because the Anglican Church is a member of NCCK? As a body corporate, which is the NCCK, What sort of leverage do you have, for example, with government to say, these are our members, and these are the standards we have set by which we will live, and therefore to make yours the one-stop shop for government to say, when we want to speak to the churches, we'll go to NCCK, we'll go to the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, because the denominations are as many as the sand in the sea.
We don't have a supervisory authority over the churches.
Do you think you should?
Discipline within the
want
churches, discipline within the churches must be internal, essentially. And that's what I think the judge was saying. They have their own constitutions, they have their own instruments, they really must be able to follow them. And if there are disputes, they should be able to resolve them. At NCCK, we really haven't found situations where there are churches that have to be reined in because they are reckless and careless. Overall, they have good practices. And in our organizational development support, we work with them, not from a condemnation perspective, but are working alongside support. And some of them have good testimony. I'm sure EAK has its own journey and experience. Yeah.
So from what I'm hearing, things are very good within the Anglican Church. Within NCCK, there's quite a bit of structure. Your members, more or less, toe the line. The Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, everything is well. Within CITAM, everything is well. So why are we here today? I mean, it's good, isn't it? Why would we ask the great Professor Mervyn King here today?
I think
Why is Dr. Schluter here today? So where is the problem? We are fine, aren't we? The church speaks with authority on matters in national life. The church can speak to matters of corruption, to matters of moral values, to chapter 6 of ethics and integrity. The church is the one that can today command all of the political leaders to the negotiating table, and they will come. That's what we're saying. We're great, aren't we? We're good, yeah?
I think maybe you missed it a bit.
Remind me, please.
I think what we are saying here is that we tend to generalize. Like say when the Kanyari saga came up, everybody was like, this is what the church is doing. The church is playing tricks on people. The church is fleecing people. The church, that was one person, not even one church, one person who is doing things in ways that may not be acceptable. Some may even actually be criminal. So we as the leaders of the church, we said, let government deal with that situation because it's a very specific thing. You will find that in any sector. Talk about lawyers, for example. They are the custodians of the law. How many rogue lawyers are there? So in the church, we are saying there are places where we need to pull up our socks or put them on. Because there are people, we will have to accept that there are churches that start, and sometimes purely out of ignorance. I have had pastors who come to my office who are not members of our denomination, but they just come and say, Bishop, I am a leader of our church. Our church has grown tremendously. I do not know how to put in structures and systems that would help us to run in an organized manner. What tips can you give me? And I have had the joy of helping these kinds of people to actually put in place systems and structures that can help them. And it gives me the impression that there are many people out there who are doing the wrong thing, not because they want to do the wrong thing, but sometimes purely out of ignorance, they don't know how any better. So really, as a church body corporate, as the body of Christ, we need to develop systems through which we can help one another, even those independents who are not under any umbrella organization, that we can help one another, not through condemnation, but rather through empowerment in the kind of conference that we have organized here, maybe at a lower level, that we can go out there and train people. How do you organize your church? How do you put in governance structures that can help you to run your church in a better way? I think we can help very, very many people who are willing to do the right thing, but just don't know how to do it.
And that is where we start to seek solutions, which is to find those that may not be there and may not be part of NCCK Evangelical Alliance or the Anglican Church. So what would it take then? Because I want us to close the discussion, and I think I'll start with you, Archbishop Sapit. What is the one thing that we can take away as a commitment here from you today that will be different? Drastic times call for drastic measures. And indeed, we grew up with Reverend Timothy Njoya, Archbishop Gitari, Ndingi Mwananzeki. All of these were, very powerful names and very powerful voices. I mean, when they came and said, from today, this is what we're going to do, forget even in political life, but even just in guidance of day-to-day Christian living, I mean, people listened. So certainly, these are not ordinary times. So from you, one thing that we can all be testament to here today, and not to condemn, but to start to walk with you as we go along.
I think you almost got us wrong when you said all is well, and we did not say everything is well in the church. And we admitted that there are shortcomings, which are things that must be worked on. So there is a whole huge importance of this gathering and this training, this session. So they did not come visit us in vain to speak to us. But I think one thing we need to do is that the church has structures. When we use our structures well, for example, in the Anglican Church of Kenya, we have, I don't make decisions alone, I have the House of Bishops. Important decision, we have to communicate through the House of Bishops. We do write guidance letters that congregations will follow and dioceses will follow, and therefore we will use our structures. One thing we must also accept is that the church, as I said, is not one just independent body. We call it church out there, but there are many church denominations and institutions that are so independent. Even in one denomination like the Anglican Church, we still say, for people to have freedom of doing things that are so dear to them, we have autonomy of dioceses. I don't make decisions for every single diocese, but we give guidance. And therefore, I'm saying we can use our structures, identify those things that will make the church, and see where the boundaries I talked about have collapsed, and say, can we put our boundaries right so that what is church is done the way the church expects. And one of the things that we are also talking about is a constitutional framework. Every church and those who do not have strong constitution need to have their own ways of dealing with their own internal mechanisms. This year, for the Anglican Church, we have earmarked as our year of governance. So when this was organized, it resonated well with our year of governance. And we are not only talking to the government about good governance, we are saying how do we interrogate our own systems, check our policies. And that's why we are doing from January to December, and say by December, we have set in motion and in place things that we will be comfortable. This will help the Anglican Church of Kenya to govern herself and to guide the flock. Thank you.
Canon Karanja, I know you've been speaking quite a bit on what's happening politically, and I know there's been work behind the scenes. What can you do at NCCK to be that moral example that has the moral authority to speak to matters of national life in Kenya? Perhaps it can be one that you would do very differently from what you have been doing, because I think that would be the purpose of a governance summit such as this, to say we're doing something, one thing significantly different.
Thank you very much. First to say, the reason we are here is not because the church has failed. The reason we are here is because we are church, and it is recognized. The church, even at its weakest in Kenya, is still the one most potential social transformation agency that must be called upon to rise to the occasion, and it must examine itself and ask, what does it need to do to optimize itself? If you ask me what is it that I think ought to be done in Kenya by the church and NCCK to address the current challenges that the country faces, I would say Kenyans need to talk with one another. And I think the most critical thing for me, our communities must engage in rigorous intra-ethnic dialogue and conversations in order to understand themselves before they can seek to engage beyond themselves. It is imperative that once they understand their situations, they must examine how they engage inter-ethnically with others. I think Kenyans are not talking enough. I think they're trying to run away from the moral responsibility of entering into genuine, authentic conversation for Kenyans to determine how we shall live together as a nation. I don't think there is a way around that. It must happen continually, but now it must happen critically. And NCCK, every day, engages very often discreetly in trying to nurture that kind of engagement. And you know, we are very public at great costs.
Okay. Very public at great cost. I know the media will come into sharp focus there. Bishop, can that dialogue start within the church and that then just that escalates to the nation? Is it perhaps that people don't think it's happening within the church? Remember, it's a matter of perception, and perception is key.
I think, as Canon Karanja has said, Kenyans need to talk, and talk candidly. One of the challenges we have, and I would say as Africans, is that we do not like direct talk. You know, if something is wrong with you, I'll tell stories around, hoping that you will learn that I'm actually saying something about you, you know? And so that's how we go about our business. And it doesn't get us to where we can solve or sort out our problems. Electoral problems have not started last year, 2016. We have had these challenges way, as far as I remember, you know, I was too young perhaps, but in the 80s, you know, you remember the Mlolongo issues and so on. And they have continued consistently every election. Now it's getting worse because more of the country is enlightened. In those days, only a small elite was. Now, a bigger proportion of the country is getting more enlightened, demanding rights, demanding things to be done in the right way, and so on. And that makes it the harder for us to continue playing games the way we used to play them. And if we do not talk, if we do not sit down and sort out these issues, intelligent fighting is worse than for those people who are ignorant. And so we will get to that place where society is much, much more informed. They know their rights. They know how things ought to be done. They are seeing it is not being done, and we will kill one another. In fact, we will annihilate one another. That is something that we do not want to confront, especially our leaders. And we who are ordinary members or citizens of this country, we rally blindly behind our leaders.
So how do we get that in the church? How do we start that conversation amongst the congregation?
We need to help our members to come to the realization that we are not sitting pretty. The fact, for example, that things are moving okay, everything seems to be going all right, does not necessarily mean that we are okay. I give the example of David, King David in the Bible, because these things didn't start today. King David in the Bible has a family. One of his sons is infatuated with a sister, stepsister, and wants to get her to sleep with her. Tricks her to bring him food in the room, gets hold of her and rapes her. She cries. The matter is reported to David. David simply says, "Oh, how sad." He does nothing about it. The brothers are very angry at what has happened, and they see their father has not done anything about what has happened to their sister. 2 years pass by. They trick their brother to go out in the field, get onto him, and kill him for doing what he did. What was the problem? Because the father failed to deal with that issue of injustice that had been meted against his own daughter. And the stepbrother took it very seriously. And that is where, in my view, we are headed. Some of us are very happy right now that the elections came, elections are gone, let's proceed. Some people are so angry elections didn't even take place as far as they are concerned. We have these two groups who are fighting internally. Some people just seething with pain, others very happy. When it gets to that place where they have opportunity to take their brothers to the field, they will kill them. We saw it in 2008. So I'm saying we need to help our members to accept that we are not at a good place. Let's get to a place where we can vent these things.
Okay.
And
let me ask
yes,
this.
ask.
Can we have some example of dialogue that's happening within our congregations?
Let me give you an
to help heal
example.
that chasm that then forms a template that can be escalated and that can be extrapolated on a larger scale. I mean, it's one thing to say we're asking the leaders to talk, but like you've rightly said, it's the people that might be having issues with each other. Can we commit here to say NCCK, Evangelical Alliance, the Anglican Church, we will set up some sort of dialogues,
Groups in our
groups
churches.
in our churches? Like, is that something we can commit to?
Yeah, I think one thing that we are not yet even have come to terms as Kenyans, we have been talking about dialogue, we have been talking about conversation. Looking at the political arena, they are talking at different wavelengths. To one group, dialogue must be around electoral justice. To one group, dialogue must be around development, that we have to conclude this chapter, we move on. In my view, I think the dialogue and the conversation the church and all of us need to begin is to begin by asking Kenyans to talk about what makes us fight every 5 years during an election year. Because this is not the first time we are fighting. We fought in 2007. Every election year in this country is a competition that leads us to killing one another. It is becoming a death trap. We must open conversations that Kenyans say, what is wrong with that moment when we are looking for leaders? Is it about exclusion and inclusion? Is it about economic? What is it? The day we shall be able to open a conversation that Kenyans can sit down and say, what is problem? Is it my ethnicity? What is it? The day we shall discover, we shall be able to get into a discussion and a conversation that will enable us say, this is what is wrong with Kenyans, and because this is what is wrong, that's why we fight every election. Can we look for a political arrangement in future that will enable us, all of us, to feel we belong to Kenya, even when we go to elections?
Okay. Canon, is it a political solution, or is it more of our morals and our values and our ethics? Perhaps if we sorted that out, then whether we have an election or not, we have our moral compass in the right direction. As we close, I know we really need to close our conversation.
Certainly, a moral and spiritual engagement will help Kenya a great deal. But this is a democracy. 42 tribes initially and a few more now have bound themselves by a constitution and a system of government to manage their public affairs in a certain way that makes them very angry when they're outside and a bit evasive when they are inside. That is not sustainable. I think there is no shortcut. Outside Kenyans engaging and genuinely examining the national process and asking what works for us. Now, you know that there are many initiatives that are engaged, but this cannot be achieved unilaterally by anyone. It will require a genuine bipartisan approach with a commitment by all Kenyans, possibly driven by people who are not the major political players, so that Kenyans can have a conversation. It's a matter of when, not whether, and I would persuade our leaders to hasten it so that Kenyans come together quickly and talk. At NCCK, you saw we issued a statement last week. I gathered together about 110 leaders of the church from across the country, bringing all tribes together, and we spent 2 days asking, where is Kenya? What message do Kenyans need to get now? And we issued a statement that has generated as much support as flack, depending on what sides people are in the national debate. In the coming weeks, we are rolling out in all our 9 regions this conversation, and we want to take it to the communities as an attempt of creating a groundswell from the grassroots that create a conducive environment for Kenyans to talk and appreciate no community can isolate itself and achieve its interests at the expense of other tribes without looking after their interests as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bishop Dr. David Oginde, Canon Peter Karanja, Archbishop Sapit. I thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Hopefully one day there will be a woman sitting here. That is my hope and my prayer, actually, that one day there will be a woman at the helm of at the helm of the leadership of the church in the country.
Our chair is a woman.
Yes, indeed.
She's just in the US, she'll be here.
Oh, okay, so you are here representing her. Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I thank you, and I thank you all for your time. And thank you for this. Hopefully this is a conversation we'll continue to have.